If you haven't heard, Japan is currently facing problems with over-tourism, with record numbers of travelers visiting the country in 2024. So they've had to take measures such as banning tourists from Kyoto's geisha district called Gion because of bad tourist behavior, installing a net barrier in a town near Mount Fuji to prevent hordes of tourists lining up and taking photos in front of this Lawson convenience store, and now the mayor of Kobe is considering raising the entrance fee sixfold for tourists to visit Himeji Castle, the largest and most visited castle in Japan. While knowing all this, my wife Yujin and I decided to take a trip to Osaka for 7 days last week in June.
Osaka de ikimashou!
As it's one of our favorite places to visit, and despite being tourists ourselves, hearing that there would be crowds everywhere was quite concerning. But we managed to have an amazing trip together, and in this video, I'll go over everything we did and what we ate on our 7-day trip that includes Kyoto and Nara, and also share some tips to help those that want to avoid the crowds as much as possible. So let's start our journey where we live in South Korea at Incheon Airport. And for those who don't know, flights between Japan and Korea are extremely cheap if you book on weekdays, and the flights are typically about 2 hours between the two countries. We paid just under 150 USD each round trip for our flights with Air Busan on the way there, and Peach Airlines going back using Google Flights, which is a pretty amazing deal considering the amount of people traveling to both Japan and Korea right now. The flight took about 2 hours to get to Kansai Airport in Osaka, and when we got there, we noticed a lot of travel SIM cards for tourists right outside the baggage carousels, but they are quite steep at 3,000 Japanese yen for 8 days. But we knew this before going, so we bought ours in Korea for about 7,000 won on Coupang, which is Korea's Amazon, which is a massive difference. So I'd check online in your country to see if there's any deals like that. And now let's talk about where we stayed. When traveling to Osaka, there's a good chance you'll want to visit the main attractions such as Osaka Castle and Dotonbori, as well as visit Kyoto, so picking a central location is important. Most people prefer Namba or Umeda, which are both really busy areas where prices aren't exactly cheap. And we like to spend less money on our hotel, as we spend most of our time exploring outside. So we ended up finding a hotel near Nakatsu Station, about a 10 to 15 minute walk from Umeda Station, called Sunplaza Rinkai. And for the entire 6 nights we stayed, it was about 24,000 Japanese yen, which comes out to just under 4,000 yen per night. Also, before leaving the airport, we had to take out some cash at the 7-Eleven ATM machines that are located after the baggage carousels that charge 220 yen per transaction, which is the same as using them in the city. And now it was time to go to our hotel, which we decided to take the airport bus to Umeda Station, which is 1,800 yen each. You can take the subway for cheaper, but I always find it nice to take the bus when arriving after a flight, just so you can sit back and look out the window. When we arrived at Umeda, we noticed immediately that it's an incredibly busy area, and it took us about 10 to 15 minutes to walk to our hotel. When we got closer, we noticed that the area around Nakatsu is a lot quieter, and we checked in.
오호.
우와, 여기 이런 것도 있는데?
오.
핑크 대신에 핑크로.
오.
아, 가성비 호텔 맞네.
맞아.
근데 좋은데? 와, 진짜 조그만데 진짜 다 있다.
오야.
됐어.
One of the reasons we travel is to see how other people live in different countries. And checking out the convenience store is a great way to do that. Also, the restaurants nearby were all closed, so we decided to have a little convenience store dinner to celebrate our first night.
지금 보니까 이게 면이 있잖아. 이게 약간 썩게 해줄 수 있으니까 이렇게 시트를 깔은 거야. 그런데 이렇게 빼주는 거야.
진짜 일본이다.
진짜.
소스가 되게 맛있나 봐.
진짜?
너무 맛있어.
It was now day 2, and we decided to check out Nara, the city east of Osaka that was Japan's capital in the 700s. We took the subway about an hour to Kintetsu Nara Station and got out at exit 2, and we were on our way. We noticed right away that we were surrounded by other tourists from outside Japan just like ourselves, and after walking straight for about 5 minutes, we arrived at the entrance of Nara Park and immediately saw the deer waiting near the food vendors that sell food to feed the deer for 200 yen. Yujin bought a little bundle of snacks, and the deer patiently waited for her to give them out one by one. When we got into the park, we noticed just how big it is. and also just how many deer there are. There are definitely a lot of tourists around, but with the sheer size of the park, I'd say it didn't feel too crowded. Also, most people were being respectful to the deer, with the exception of a lady who was running away screaming from a deer and dropped all of her garbage on the ground only not to pick it up after, which wasn't great to see. There are also so many things to see within Nara Park, like the botanical garden, a Shinto shrine called Kasuga Taisha, and a massive Buddhist temple called Tōdai-ji, which both of us had never seen, so we decided to check it out for 800 yen each. Tōdai-ji was built in the 700s, and it has one of the largest bronze Buddha statues in all of Japan. To be honest, I wasn't expecting a lot, but when I got inside it was absolutely breathtaking. It's hard to get a grasp through photos or videos just how big this temple and the Buddha statue inside it are, but the statue itself is 15 meters, or almost 50 feet high. And as someone who has visited a ton of Buddhist temples in Asia, Tōdai-ji is one of the most impressive and beautiful temples I've ever seen. There were definitely a lot of tourists there as well, but it's still worth checking out in my opinion. After visiting the temple, it was getting incredibly hot out at about 30 degrees Celsius and humid, so we decided to find a place to eat nearby. And Yujin found a Japanese home cooking restaurant to cool off at. This place is called Nara Omotenashi, which means to look after guests. And the food comes out on little side dishes just like the shape of the logo. And everything was really light and seasoned with different sauces, making for a big variety of flavors, and it was really fresh. So I strongly recommend this place. And right outside the restaurant there was the Higashimuki shopping street, which looked like it had a ton of shops with souvenirs. But for us it was time to head back to Osaka on the subway, and we got amazing views of the city on our way back on the train. Also, since our subway transferred at Namba station, we decided to check out Osaka's most famous area of Dotonbori on the way back. Dotonbori is a river surrounded by buildings that's basically Osaka's version of New York's Times Square, filled with massive billboards that light up at night, including this Glico sign that everyone takes photos at, and tons of restaurants in the surrounding area, some of them with really cool moving signs like this. There's also a ton of entertainment and shopping in the surrounding area, and you can watch just about any video on Osaka, and this will probably be the highlight. But for us, it was so filled with tourists that it barely felt like we were in Japan. And we've explored Dotonbori in the past, so we decided to make our visit brief. But there are some great food stands just north of the river at Shinsaibashi, which is Osaka's most famous shopping area, and we decided to try out Takoyaki, or octopus balls, one of Osaka's specialties, and was said to be invented by an Osaka street vendor named Tomekichi Endo in 1935, but was apparently an adaptation of another dish called choboyaki, which is very similar but flat instead. We tried oiri, which was 4 different flavors of takoyaki, and it ended up being really good. To start day 3, we spent some time walking through the massive underground shopping area, connecting all the subway and train stations at Umeda. Inside you can find a ton of different restaurants and cafes, and it's also linked up to a ton of department stores, so it's a really good area to spend some time in when the weather isn't so good. And for today, we had a really special plan. In January 2023, while traveling to Hokkaido, Japan for a ski trip, we met 2 incredibly nice Japanese ladies from Osaka named Chieko-san and Mieko-san randomly at Rizutsu Ski Resort. And they are fluent in Korean, so we had a little conversation and exchanged contact information. Before going to Osaka, we contacted them again and decided to meet up with them, and found out that Chieko-san does tours in English, Korean, and Japanese close to Osaka Castle. We decided to walk to Tanimachi Rokuchome to meet up with them, which is a good 1 hour or 5-kilometer walk. And I want to include this on our list of things to do, as if you take the subways everywhere, you do get to travel faster between places of interest, but you end up missing a lot of the residential areas in between them, which is one of our favorite parts of traveling. Just seeing how regular people live their day-to-day lives, and you can usually stumble upon some interesting views that aren't surrounded by other tourists as well. So I strongly recommend saving half a day on any trip to go on a random adventure, get lost, and explore. But let's get back to the tour. We met up with both Chieko-san and Mieko-san at the station, and we started our tour, which Chieko-san arranged specifically to our tastes as people who enjoy exploring around neighborhoods randomly, which we do a lot in Korea. And it was so much fun that we'd like to promote her tour because I think a lot of people who tune into our channel will enjoy it a lot. And this wasn't sponsored or planned in advance or anything. We just simply want to help out an amazing lady with an adventurous and caring spirit who truly deserves more customers. And she'll adjust her tour to your liking if you also want to try it. And she can do it in either English or Korean, no problem. Since we had already been to Osaka Castle on a previous trip, which is worth going to once if you haven't been to it, we started exploring the Chuo and Tennoji wards near the castle, which ended up being more interesting than visiting the castle itself. Chieko-san was extremely knowledgeable about the area, and talked us through the history of the neighborhood, as the castle grounds used to be a lot bigger than they are today, and there are still remains of the original wall hidden throughout the streets and in between the buildings. She then took us to a shop that recycled traditional Japanese tatami mats, which is the flooring found in traditional Japanese homes, and they create various goods from the recycled materials. We then saw some traditional houses that have been around for hundreds of years, and an older lady we met on the street invited us into her house to check out her origami, which was really beautiful. And having both Chieko-san and Mieko-san with us to translate made it so we could experience things a lot more in depth than if we were by ourselves. We then went to a traditional market, explored the older alleyways from higher up, and we even got to taste test green tea from a very passionate green tea master, who walked us through step by step how to make the perfect cup of green tea. And it was also completely free and not part of the tour, so I'll include the location link in the description. And I won't show every detail of the tour, as it's better to experience everything in person with Chieko-san explaining it to you, but I'll include the link in the description, so check it out if it sounds interesting. We then ended the night at an amazing okonomiyaki place called Okonomiyaki Fusaya, which is a type of Japanese pancake grilled with cabbage, meat, and/or seafood, and of course okonomiyaki sauce. This is the best okonomiyaki we've ever tried, and there were a variety of options to choose from, ending one of our most memorable days in Japan for us with a bang. For day 4, it was time to head to Kyoto, the city famous for traditional Japanese culture with its many temples, palaces, and shrines. And in particular, there are 3 places that are commonly seen as must-see places, starting with the Fushimi Inari Taisha, the Shinto shrine famous for the pathway with thousands of vermilion gates. Then there is the Kiyomizu-dera, the Buddhist temple located on the mountainside with the beautiful pagoda. And lastly, Kinkaku-ji, the Golden Buddhist Temple. Yujin and I had already seen Fushimi Inari Taisha on our last trip together, and I've been to Kinkaku-ji a few times on different trips, which is a bit out of the way and not a must-see in my opinion. So instead of heading to one of those 3 first, we started by heading to the mountains in hopes of avoiding the crowds. Our journey started by taking the Keihan railway line from Yodoyabashi Station all the way to Daimachi Yanagi Station in northern Kyoto, and transferring to the Kurama line, which is fully outdoor and reminds me of taking a trip into a Studio Ghibli movie. The train goes through the beautiful northern neighborhoods of Kyoto, and then through the forest, which barely has enough space for the train to pass through, and it's really cool to just sit down and watch the train go through. And then we arrived at Kurama Station, with tons of space to ourselves, on our way to the Kurama-dera Temple. It costs 500 yen to enter the temple, and it's basically a 30-minute hike up a lot of stairs through the forest that eventually leads there. The temple was founded in the 700s, and it's said that a Chinese monk initiated a disciple into the Buddhist path, who had a vision that Mount Kurama had a special spiritual power, and the temple was built on the mountain to control it. On the way up, you pass various Buddha statues and small waterfalls, and it's incredibly serene and peaceful. You can also take a cable car to the top, but in my opinion, the hike up is the best part of the journey. There are also a lot of old monuments with moss growing on them, so you can really feel the presence of time here, and it almost feels like adventuring inside a Zelda game, with massive trees surrounding the path that make it really majestic. Everything here is old, but feels harmonious with the surrounding nature, and when you get closer to the top, you get amazing views of the mountains nearby, surrounded by pine trees. We made it to the temple, which is incredibly peaceful and quiet, exactly the type of atmosphere we were looking for. And there's also a shrine further up the mountain called Kifune Shrine that I've seen in the past and worth the trip if you have the energy for it, but it was starting to get really hot out, and we wanted to head down to get some food and cool off. The heat was really getting to us, so we accidentally went to the wrong restaurant with lower reviews, but that didn't matter and proved that Google reviews aren't everything, as the owner was super friendly, and despite originally wanting cold soba noodles, the hot ones that I accidentally ordered were amazing too, as were the udon noodles that Yujin ordered. And we are now on our way to the second attraction of the day, which we talked about earlier, Kiyomizu-dera, the Buddhist temple on the mountainside, as it was under repair the last time we were in Kyoto. And this is where we definitely got a taste of what over-tourism looks like. The alleyway going up to the temple is filled with various gift shops and some hidden shrines on the way up, and it was absolutely swarming with people, which was a huge contrast from the mountain temple we visited earlier. However, Kiyomizu-dera is incredibly beautiful, and once you get to the entrance of the temple grounds, it starts to space out so you can start to actually see your surroundings, with lots of beautiful traditional Japanese architecture to look at. Kiyomizu-dera is also from the late 700s, and was built after a priest had a vision to build a temple next to the Otowa Spring, which is still around today. And when we got to the main hall, there were a lot of people sitting and standing around everywhere, giving it a completely different atmosphere than Kurama-dera we saw earlier. And when you walk past the temple, you get the main view of the main hall with the city in the background, which is a really beautiful sight, and then continue forth to the pagoda on the mountainside. Despite the amount of people everywhere, I think it's still worth seeing once. And when we were heading back to Osaka, we accidentally stumbled upon the biggest cemetery that either of us had seen before, called the Otani Cemetery. It's important to be respectful walking through a cemetery, so we explored quietly, and it was absolutely silent, filled with gravestones all over the mountainside, with multiple layers, almost like a big sea of them. I don't normally seek this type of place out while traveling, but stumbling upon it randomly was a very interesting and unique experience, and ended up being one of the more memorial places of our trip, just for the massive scale and the atmosphere. And now we are heading back to Osaka, and we got off at Umeda Station, looking for a sushi restaurant to splurge out a bit on after a long day. And we found a place located on the 12th floor of the Hankyu department store with a really long name. And we weren't expecting that much, to be honest, but wow, it was good. First of all, the shrimp sushi was incredibly tender, and the sauce made it extremely creamy and savory. And then they had a plate with 3 different types of maguro or tuna sushi, and all 3 of them were probably top 10 things I've ever eaten in my life. So I strongly recommend this place. We had now done a lot of exploring away from where we stayed near Umeda, so it was time to do some browsing around nearby. And to start our day, there was something of interest for both of us in the same building. Japan is the biggest manufacturer for cameras in the world by far, and there's a massive camera and electronics department store called Yodobashi Camera that can be found all over the country. And the one right beside Umeda Station is the biggest one I've ever seen. It's 7 floors of various tech and other goods ranging from smartphones, computers, physical media, cameras, video games, toys, and even camping equipment. And as a camera nerd myself, I love the camera section because you can physically pick up any camera from basically every brand and play around with it. And there's even a huge selection of different lenses to try out. And they usually have items on display that aren't available yet, like the Panasonic Lumix S9, which is Panasonic's answer to the compact retro camera craze that's happening right now. I think I spent about 2 hours here, and I could have spent the entire day no problem. And then for those who want to go clothes shopping, or maybe your wife isn't interested in cameras like mine isn't, well, luckily Uniqlo is right beside Yodobashi Camera, which you can think of kind of like Japan's version of H&M, but higher quality. And here you can buy things for a lot cheaper than the Uniqlos found in Korea and other countries, especially with the weak yen right now. There's also more selection, and you can buy everything tax-free if you spend over 5,000 yen. After doing some browsing, Yujin and I caved and had Wendy's for the first time in about 10 years, which tasted just like I remember from North America, with the Cajun chicken sandwich especially being amazing. And they even have draft beer here. And after we decided to head down to Denden town, which is Osaka's version of Akihabara Electronics Town in Tokyo. To get there, we decided to go on another longer walk, as for us just being in Japan and discovering the hidden treasures on the quiet, well-organized streets away from the crowds is one of our favorite things to do. And we like to stop in at various convenience stores and marts on the way. We arrived at Denden town, where they sell lots of anime goods such as figurines and manga. There are computer stores selling various parts, and of course, retro gaming stores. There are massive buildings decorated with anime characters. The Lawson convenience store dressed up like the Dragon Quest was awesome. And just wandering through the main alleyway, there were tons of people walking around. So it'd be best to arrive at 11 a.m. when things are opening up. Also, there were tons of maids lining the streets for the maid cafes, which Yujin and I tried in the past, and it was one of the more unique things we have ever done before. And of course, the famous retro gaming store Super Potato. I've been visiting this store a lot these past 10 years, and it's where I bought most of my Zelda collection. That's getting older and starting to collect dust today, but I've noticed that there was a big shift towards retro gaming during the pandemic, and prices have skyrocketed. I think I paid about 2,500 yen for my original Famicom Legend of Zelda cartridge, and it's now one of the special games inside the store, sitting inside a display for almost 9,000 yen. The Game Boy Color is also really expensive at about 20,000 yen each. And it seems like as more tourists visit Japan, stores like Super Potato have gotten way more expensive with a lot less stock. However, it's still really cool to look around and see the games, especially when you find one like this Power Rangers cartridge for the Super Famicom worth almost $2,500 USD. We then returned back to Nakatsu for dinner, and we found a ramen place nearby in some alleyways that almost reminded me of Yeonnam-dong near Hongdae in Seoul. The place is called Ramen Kikuhan, and it seems like they get a lot of tourist customers, as most of the staff spoke perfect English. We ordered the shoyu or soy sauce ramen, and it was the richest broth I've ever had before. The noodles are handmade with a thick and nice chewy texture, and there's a variety of chicken, pork, and eggs if you order the special toppings. It was pretty heavy, but good to my tastes.
Day 6.
It was now day 6, and our final full day in Osaka. We went back to Umeda and found an amazing bakery cafe with tons of selection, lots of seating, and good value too. And Japan seems to have some of the best baked goods I've ever eaten before, so it's definitely worth a try. Also today it was time to finally check out the Umeda Sky Building Observatory, which is about a 10-minute walk from Umeda Station. And since there is a lot of construction going on, Google recommended us to go on a big detour. But we found out after that there was also a direct route that we didn't know about. The Umeda Sky Building is 170 meters high and was completed in 1993, and has a really unique and futuristic architecture from the outside. And to get to the observatory, take the escalators up to the 3rd floor, and then ride the elevator up to the 39th floor. You then ride this futuristic escalator in mid-air that's probably familiar if you've watched other videos on Osaka. And this is where you buy your ticket. That's 1,500 yen for adults. And the observatory has 360-degree views of the city, which is really beautiful to look at, and you can see really far as well. There's also a cafe with some desserts and also various beers right at the beginning, and you can sit down and enjoy the view with a light snack. The unique thing about this observatory is you get to explore outside on the rooftop at this really interesting ring structure that lets you walk around safely and enjoy the views. It would have been really great to come here at sunset and nighttime, but we came early in the morning on purpose to avoid the crowds. And as we left, there were swarms of people coming, so I think it would have been jam-packed if we waited. And it was definitely worth going early to get ourselves a lot of space. We spent some more time just relaxing and enjoying Umeda during the day, visiting Yoshinoya, which is like a cheap Japanese fast food. And I've been addicted to the gyudon or beef bowl since I first tried it, so I recommend it if you haven't. And then when it was time for dinner, we explored the indoor alleyways found all over Umeda, which were definitely very busy, but as a contrast to Shinsaibashi and Dotonbori, it was mostly Japanese people hanging out there, and it had an amazing atmosphere. We wanted to end our trip with a bang, and we found a hidden yakitori or meat skewers place called Komachi. This place had a really local vibe to it, and it looks like it's been around for a very long time, with a really friendly owner that never laughed at our terrible Japanese, and bar seating right in front to watch him work away. A guy beside us recommended the chicken ball skewers, which are really savory and juicy, and the karaage chicken, or fried chicken, which is the best and juiciest karaage I've ever had. Komachi was a great place to feel Osaka's warmth, and the really relaxed and homey atmosphere made it the perfect little joint to end our trip. And don't be intimidated by the local atmosphere, as people were really friendly in there.
Ready to go back home, babe?
어, 야. 코리아.
Back
다시
to
만나요.
Korea.
백두 코리아.
It was now time to head back to Seoul, but our flight wasn't until 6 p.m., so we decided to check out Dotonbori one last time in the morning in hopes that there would be less people. When we arrived at Namba station, we found some lockers that allow you to store your bags for up to 3 days for 500 yen in the smallest locker. And we could fit all our stuff in there, as we typically travel with backpacks instead of carriers. When we got to Dotonbori, there were still a lot of people around, but way less than there were when we went there around dinner time before. A lot of places were closed as they seemed to open at 11 a.m., but some of the popular food stalls open early. So if you're looking to buy something like the cheesecake at Rikuro's, The morning time would be perfect for that. We had some free time, so we decided to explore the area, and found the Hozenji Yokocho Alley, which has a temple with a statue covered in moss from people pouring water over it as a form of prayer after World War II. Then we decided to go back to Denden town one more time to check things out with less people, and we tried to find a smiling Gon figure from Hunter x Hunter, which we have never been able to find, but we didn't have any luck, and it was time for our last meal. We originally wanted to go to Ichiran, which is the most famous ramen chain all over Japan, but the 3 different franchises in the surrounding area all had waiting times of about an hour. And no offense to Ichiran, it's good, but not wait an hour in a lineup good. And our last tip for the video is to look around for similar restaurants nearby when you see a line like this. Usually when a place is really popular, another place will pop up right beside it. And in our case, there was another ramen place that sold a lighter ramen filled with vegetables that came in a huge bowl, which is probably better overall than Ichiran. And also the perfect meal to have before a flight. And that ended our amazing 7-day trip to Osaka. The entire trip, including our flights, hotel, transportation, entertainment, and food, cost us just over 80,000 yen per person, which isn't too bad for a week-long trip to Japan. And we absolutely pigged out on amazing food from restaurants and convenience stores every single day. So we could have made it a lot cheaper if we wanted. And we got to explore the majority of places we had our eyes set on. And while exploring, we realized that Osaka is an amazing city, and definitely one of our favorites in Japan. We're already looking forward to our next trip there, as there are so many things to see and so much to eat too. We hope this video had some useful information and we could share some interesting places from Osaka with everyone. Thank you so much for watching, and hope you have a great trip to Osaka someday.